Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next session of the day. We're at online conference number 3, Value the Land, and we can't think of a better set of presenters who are joining us throughout the day to facilitate a discussion on this topic. Today's session not only combines perspectives from 3 people doing really amazing work, but we think it will inspire you, perhaps, to do some amazing work of your own, because we all have the tools to do the kind of work that these 3 amazing people are doing. So we're going to learn about their stories and then think about how we can tell and capture some of our own. But to introduce that topic in just a moment, I'll be introducing James, Alex, and Josh. And you can see they come from 3 different parts of the Smithsonian, all of which are doing amazing work in this area. But before we go and get into things, I did want to point out that there are some people who are joining us today. This is their first time, so I wanted to say a few things. First of all, you're part of a project today, which is brought to you by the Smithsonian, Microsoft Partners in Learning, and Taking It Global. And we welcome all of our colleagues from around the world and all of the extended communities of each of our partners. I also wanted to point out that there's a chat box on the screen, and that's available to you at any point for you to go ahead and not only ask questions, but you might also use it to pose or share resources or to post comments that you might want to address to other people in the live online session. So feel free to use that, not just to submit questions, but to share any other thoughts you might have. By the way, we are also curious to know a little bit about you. So if you haven't yet introduced yourself, we'd love for you to go ahead and do that. There's an area in that chat box on the left side of the screen where you can go ahead and tell us a little bit about you. So go ahead, and we'll give you a moment there to tell us a little bit about yourself. And by the way, I'm also going to bring up a poll because we would like to know how many people are with you at your computer right now, because we know many of you are joining in classrooms with large groups, and it'd be great to know that when you type in something, you may be representing many people who are with you today. So excellent to see all of you. Good. Yeah, we do have indeed a lot of groups joining us. So I hope you'll feel free to reach out to everyone around you and try to share some of their thoughts and ideas. Lastly, before we get going, we have a lot to cover. Do note that you can follow us on Twitter at @ShoutLearning. That's the hashtag. And if you're posting to Twitter, use that hashtag so we can keep up with all of your great contributions in that venue. And if you're on Facebook, you can also reach us at facebook.com/ShoutLearning. And we'll be posting updates there both during and after the conference. So please like us on there. All right. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to the group. And one last thing. Our colleague Dan Porter is online again from Kent in the UK, where he is going to be capturing today's session in the form of a graphic illustration, which we'll share periodically and at the end of the session. So Dan, thanks for being our ears and eyes and our hands in capturing the session. So with that, let's turn the floor over to the team.
Well, greetings. This is Alex Griswold up in Cambridge, Mass., and I'm so glad to have you with us today. And I'd also like to introduce my co-presenters.
I'm Joshua Bell. I'm Curator of Globalization in the Anthropology Department at the Natural History Museum in Washington, D.C.
And I'm James Deutsch. I'm a program curator with the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, also in Washington, D.C.
And today we are launching the Shout Oral History Challenge. And what we hope is that the Shout community will respond to this challenge with sending us videos and interviews of people in your local area, of people who value the land and who have experienced land use changes or who have a particular perspective on land and forests. So let's start by just talking a little bit about what is oral history. Please respond and type your answer. We'd like to see some varieties of what you people think in the Shout community.
So when you think of oral history, what comes to your mind? You can go ahead and type that in the chat box on the left. We're already getting responses in. For example, up in Toronto, Kate says the passing on of traditions. Susan refers to it as storytelling, a very succinct, good answer from Olympia. And Marta says interviews, documentaries. So she's actually getting into some of the ways that oral histories are shared, which is a really great answer. Stories within families or community. Living knowledge, says April in Kodiak, Alaska.
Well, these are great answers, and there's really a rich tradition of oral histories. Let's look at one of the definitions, which is to record the stories of witnesses of history. And Jim, tell us what that means exactly.
Yeah, well, actually, the picture we're looking at also is a photograph that was taken at the National World War II reunion in 2004 that was organized by our Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. It was held in conjunction with the dedication of the National World War II Memorial here in Washington, D.C. over Memorial Day weekend in 2004, and tens of thousands of World War II veterans came to the event, and we used that opportunity to interview them, as it says, to record their stories as witnesses of history. But one very important thing is that much of history has been written by what we might call the top down, interviewing the generals or the politicians, the leaders, and not many other people had been recording history from the point of view of the foot soldiers or the Marines or the people who were on the ground, in the air, flying the airplanes. And that's one thing that we very much try to do as part of our National World War II reunion. And I think for oral history in general, that's what we do as part of our Smithsonian Folklife Festival, which is an annual event, and as part of our ongoing activities with the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage is to reach out and interview people who may not be well known, but who have insights and perceptions and ideas about their lives and are willing to share those insights, ideas, and perceptions with larger communities.
And oral history has a long tradition. It started, of course, with people just writing down narratives or even remembering them. But as soon as the ability to record voice and photographs was available, then people used that. And here's an example from the past.
Right, so this is Josh talking. This is an image in the National Anthropological Archive, and what it shows, does anyone know what the image is of? Can anyone tell what's going on?
Good question.
Any
Anybody?
ideas?
You can use the chat box on the left to type in a quick thought if you know what's going on here.
It's a very iconic photograph in many ways. Recording a language, that's a good idea. That's actually the common perception of this photograph. But interestingly enough, this photograph, it's the man on the right wearing the feathered headdress is Mountain Chief of the Montana Blackfeet in the U.S., and he came to Washington, D.C., to the Smithsonian to talk to Frances Densmore, who is the woman on the left of the image, and she was a long-term ethnomusicologist, which is the study of music and sound of the Bureau of American Ethnology, which was founded in 1876, I believe, and ran through into the 1960s. And she actually, in this image, it's a fantastic image of collaboration in that Frances Densmore is actually playing back sound recordings that she had earlier recorded from other members of the Montana Blackfeet tribe, and Mountain Chief is actually interpreting it in sign language, and it's hard to tell because his hand is blocked by the phonograph. But she, as I said, it's a fantastic image of collaboration, and it speaks to, I think, in one sense, how kind of archival materials and collections in museums around the world kind of document oral histories, but also this kind of the nature of oral history, which, as Jim mentioned, is collaborative, right? It involves two people, and it involves a kind of interpretation and discussion.
That's absolutely right. It is important to remember that oral history is not just the person who is being recorded, who is the bearer of history, but also the person who is asking them questions and bringing them out and perhaps connecting them with other people who may have a different point of view or a different part of the same story to tell. So, oral history is a way that continues the traditions that exist in many places where there's no written history or where writing is not as common as it is here, and where television and radio have been, just recently introduced. So oral history is all of these things, but it's most important a way of recording the points of view of people who otherwise would take their stories to the grave, or who would simply have no way to share their unique and special perspective. So in talking about the forest, we thought we would bring some examples of work that we've done or our groups have done that show how people who value the land have talked about it. So one example here is this short video clip from Papua New Guinea. Philip Damon, who led a clan of, he was a clan leader of 11 clans who signed a conservation deed in 2002 to set up the Wenang Conservation Area, in spite of great pressure to have logging in the area and clear-cutting the land. So let's listen to this clip.
One platime. In one platime, I can stop with them 2-3 years, then by finish the service. Conservation, I can sim long platime. I can sim long platime, long time, long me, I go long time, long picking, I beg all time, long tumbona. Conservation, and best up long platime straight. Been looking this land, now me becoming set back long. A blooming and meeting of some ground bloomy too, suppose logging comes in, I must kiss him this club up, so Miss Kerim this lago and me no up, so. Mi bin konservim des labus na mi lakim blo before papa stop tumbuna stop ne come long papa ne come long mi pikinini tu I must have one kind of solo des lab mark mi can kisim kai na mi can kisim strong la bus blomi na mi can round bus say give me plenty good benefit come inside bus ne se lusimi ne goda na bagara pe mi na bus say only mi na bring over good something to come inside na mi say kisim strong on top long bus ground blooming na misa sanap na misa round no what.
So Philip has received recognition internationally for this work, and he's also an example of people who really value the land and understand the land, and see that it's not just his generation, but it's something that's passed onto his family and that he received from people before him.
And Alex, this is Jonathan. We're getting some interesting comments in response to this video, including this one from Marta, who joins us from the Gambia, who says he's loyal to the land. He sees this as a symbiotic relationship.
Absolutely, that's a great comment, because I think that we are symbiotic with the land. We may not realize it, those of us who live in cities, but the resources that we get, wood, paper, food, water, fresh air, many things all come from the land, and our connection to that has been broken in many cases, and this project may be a way to reconnect that. So
I would just jump in by saying, and I think one of the things that's interesting about this case is that Philippe is, in working with conservation movements, right? So he's responding to pressures put on his community by kind of the global need for forests as wood for various productions. So it's actually a very interesting statement against logging and to kind of keep the ancestral ties and the subsistence.
Well, Jonathan, you've done work on the other side of Papua New Guinea. Let's go on and talk about that a bit.
Right. So, there's the slide. So we were just to give everyone a brief perspective. This video that of Philippe was up here in the Madang province. I've worked for the last 11 years as an anthropologist on the south coast of Papua New Guinea, where a very different kind of relationship to forestry in terms of extraction and logging is taking place. So I've, as I mentioned, worked there for 11 years, and I work in an area known as the Parari Delta, which I'm showing you a map of here, which is on the south coast. And this is a large delta system, so it's really made up of all these rivers. And in the next session, I'll be talking more about that. But what I wanted to show here is, looking at this map, does anything strike anyone out there as being particular? I should add that the red dots that I'm showing you on the map, this is a station. This is where people can get subsistence food store. This is the village of Papua where I was based, and then there's some other villages along here. Does anything strike anyone out there? Well, maybe as you're looking at it, I'll just chime in and give you a hint. These little, they're very close to the river. That's right, Marta. And the water is actually their main source of life. So the Parari is the third largest river in the country of Papua New Guinea, which has been independent since 1975. And what you can also see here is the actual logging roads. And they're along here, and then they're up in here. And this is imagery from Google Earth, and it's probably out of date. So now these roads actually connect. So what this community has been facing and engaging with is large-scale logging by a company known as Rabona Henjau, which is a Malaysian company. And they've been working. They got contracts through the government to extract forests with and without the permission of landowners. It's a very complicated thing. And then up here, the dots up here are oil and gas extraction sites that's happening in the region. All of which, as you can imagine, has had impacts on the environments, right? So much in the way that Philip was talking about, what he didn't want to have happen to his community is happening to the communities that I work with. So here I'm just showing you an image of logs and trees that have been chopped. I'm showing you here the ships that come into this port area here to take the trees out. Most of the 80% of the logs from Papua New Guinea go to China, which then they're processed into a variety of source materials, which end up coming to the U.S., to Europe, and other areas. And then finally here, the rig sites. What I've been doing for the last 11 years is to work with people to understand their relationships to their environment and how they narrate their histories in light of the changing environmental impacts of these projects. So if we go to the next slide here, I'm showing you an image now of my work with communities, bringing back to people, as part of the recording of oral histories, old photographs taken in 1922. And one of the things that I found extremely productive and generative of talking with people is sharing old photographs. It's a way, particularly in societies like in the Parari Delta that have kind of experienced massive economic and social transformation due to Christianity and other things. It's a way to bring back both older environments as well as older traditions. And so what you're looking at is a bunch of people engaged in intergenerational dialogues, that is, young children, older men, speaking to one another about what's in the photograph. And I'm going to switch now to one of these examples of an old photograph. And Jonathan, I think we had a question about that.
We do have a question. Yeah, no. We're going to go ahead and ask folks, what as you look at this picture, what do you think that people who live in this village today, noting that this picture was taken in 1922, what do you think people who live in this village today would focus on when they talk about what they see in this photo? It was taken almost 100 years ago. So imagine you live in this village today, you're looking at this photo. What do you think they are pointing out, noticing, telling stories about? And Kate's first back in with an answer. Thanks, Kate. Appreciate it. She's talking about maybe the water.
Right.
Let's see what else. Or Kate says maybe there isn't water there anymore, which is a possibility she considers. Amy says the amount of water in the trees. Maybe Sarah's talking about recognizing people. What the land around the dam looked like, says Michelle. The way the waterway has changed in terms of its path.
Yep.
How people are using the water, what kind of activities that they're doing.
Right. And I'll just jump in here. So people, it was very interesting, and this is actually one of the really exciting things about working with photographs doing oral histories, is that I was very interested in this house here, which was a building established by the colonial government. Papua New Guinea was controlled by Australians until independence. And this is a building that Australian police would come and colonial officers would come and stay and use to make sure that everything was kind of, in the right order, that people were following sanitation issues, they would adjudicate and settle court cases, etc. So I was interested in what people had to say about this building. What was very interesting is that the women focused on this area here, which some of the people out there mentioned. And this, what you see, is actually young women and older women using a fishing weir, and it's hard to see it in the image, but it's a fishing weir that's blocked this small creek, and then these young girls here are using dip nets to catch fish. So all of these the women that I encountered focused on that aspect of the photographs and really revealed their preoccupation with fishing, which is a female activity by and large. The men, by contrast, focused on all the trees in the background. And this is a site, actually, that they don't currently live in and they haven't lived in for 80 years. And these men who are in their 60s and 70s could tell you each individual species of the tree, and then in particular, and we'll jump to the next slide, 2 trees, and I've got arrows pointing them up here, which had particular ancestral names. So one of the things that people have commented earlier was this kind of symbiotic relationship. And in the Prairie Delta, people exactly have that. Trees are given names, which link them to ancestors, which link them to histories, which are understood to actually be in the land. So it's something that's actually materially expressed in the forest itself. So that kind of process, and I think the process of doing oral history in general, kind of at one level explodes our expectations about what history is, but it also reveals, as Jim mentioned, this kind of from the ground up, what local people's perceptions of the past is, what the environment is, and what the values are around that. Kind of switching tracks a little, engagement around a photograph happened in 2001, 2002. Since then, I've been going back as the kind of resource extraction, the logging and the oil and gas has kind of increased, and worked with communities to figure out what they're interested in terms of documenting about their oral histories and their environmental relationships. And just to kind of close out this case example, you're looking at 2 examples of photos where I've done various things such as travel the river system and mark with GPS, the global positioning system, kind of tree names and land sites, as well as working with community members to do ethnobotany, that is the kind of local understandings of trees and plants. So, for example, this photograph on the right, which I'm pictured in, I spent 1 hour, and in 1 hour with this community of a group of men, I essentially collected 120 different tree names, as well as a plethora of different uses, right? So this is a community that intimately knows its forest, relies on its forest, but due to the pressures of kind of global economy is being forced, and in some cases choosing to actually live a more kind of a life dominated by capitalism. However, that said, one of the things that oral history can do, and it kind of helps to visualize through such things as doing GPS work, we can actually create maps, such as the one I'm showing you here, which kind of mark out those sites of intangible heritage, right? So this is a way to create a document for the community, by the community, and for the community, which then they can use to kind of help to create a document which they can then use with their engagement with one another, their engagement with the government, and their engagement with these resource companies. So that's a kind of important thing. I think that oral history can have a very direct and locally important impact as well as globally important. But I think I'll say that's all I'll say for now, and I think we're going to switch over to Jim and another example.
Right. Well, this brings us back to our National World War II reunion from 2004. As I mentioned earlier, this just was a wonderful opportunity for bringing tens of thousands of World War II veterans, often coming with their families, to help commemorate Second World War, to dedicate the World War II Memorial, but really to share their stories. And as I said, the Smithsonian and also the Library of Congress American Folklife Center took advantage of this opportunity to interview many of the veterans, and the results of those interviews are in our archives, both at the Smithsonian and at the Library of Congress. But I wanted to talk more about the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, which, in fact, just concluded 2 days ago. The Folklife Festival started in 1967, and every year since then, we have, for 10 days on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., brought hundreds of tradition bearers to Washington, and the idea is to have them engage in cultural conversations with our visitors. In the picture you're looking at, this comes from 2008 when Bhutan was one of the featured countries, the small Himalayan kingdom of Bhutan. We brought roughly 100 Bhutanese, and we took advantage of that opportunity to interview many of the participants from Bhutan. In this particular year of 2011, I was the curator for a program on the Peace Corps. And I think, Marta, you had mentioned that you're doing working on a documentary for the Peace Corps in the Gambia. We brought for the Folklife Festival, again, roughly 100 participants, many of them Peace Corps volunteers or returned Peace Corps volunteers, but most of them were actually the people with whom Peace Corps volunteers are working overseas, from Kenya and Jamaica and Ghana, Belize, Zambia, Ukraine, Philippines, Morocco, Peru, and all 15 different countries where Peace Corps volunteers are serving. And during the 10 days of the festival, we were always interviewing them, recording our conversations with them, because the idea is to capture, as I said, these ideas of the perceptions and the outlooks of people whose histories are not often recorded. One of my favorite examples at this year's festival was we had 5 women from northern Kenya. They're members of the Ngurunit Basket Weavers Cooperative. That's Ngurunit for our transcriber. And they had never even been to the capital of Kenya, Nairobi, before. Where they live, it's 2 days of hard travel to Nairobi, but they came to Nairobi to get their passports, to get their visas, and finally to fly to Washington. And, nobody had ever recorded them before. And we learned so many fascinating things about their lives that they have not had rain for 3 years in the place in northern Kenya where they live. So bringing them to the festival, again, provided us just so many excellent opportunities for conducting oral histories and hearing their stories, learning about their traditions, their skills, and their experiences. Here's another slide from a previous Folklife Festival. So, the idea is to, as I said, to bring these people to Washington and then allow our visitors to learn from them. As I mentioned, ours is a 10-day event. This year, I think we recorded 1,080,000 visitors. So that's roughly 100,000 visitors a day are visiting the festival. I should say that the festival typically has 3 different programs. Peace Corps was one of those programs. The other program was on Colombia in South America, and the third program was on rhythm and blues music. But one of my favorite festivals was in 2005. I was the curator for a program that looked at the Forest Service, the U.S. Forest Service, on the occasion of its 100th anniversary. And for that festival, again, we brought 100 different participants, and these were wildlife biologists and forest entomologists, as well as firefighters, smoke jumpers, fire lookouts. So people from throughout the Forest Service, from all the different regions of the Forest Service, and we took advantage of their coming to Washington to learn about the history of the Forest Service and ways in which they are valuing the land. Again, that I think very few people had ever taken the time to talk to these, archaeologists, biologists, entomologists, and to learn their views of the land. My dissertation was on World War II veterans coming home from the war, Second World War, and I only wish that more oral histories had been done to interview veterans coming home, because by the time that I was doing my work, which was 40 years after the war, a lot of those memories had faded. So again, that's just another kind of plug for capturing oral histories while you can, because you really never know when you'll have that opportunity again. Another view of our Folklife Festival, it's held outdoors under tents. You can see those white tents in the background, and that's where our participants are doing their demonstrations. That's also where we are interviewing them and recording oral histories throughout the 10 days of the festival.
Wow. Well, thanks. The idea that at the Folklife Festival, it's not just experts who are going and interviewing people, but the citizens themselves can ask the questions, Jim?
Absolutely, and that's, we try to encourage what we call cultural conversations, because where else, really, can you meet a monk from Bhutan or a Ngurunit basket weaver from northern Kenya? Unless you go to those places, you really will never have those opportunities. So that's one of the reasons why the Smithsonian brings all these people to Washington, D.C., so that our visitors can meet, learn from them, and in some cases we allow people to conduct interviews directly on their own. I mean, we do most of the interviewing ourselves, but certainly there are opportunities for others to come and to meet the people and record interviews and to learn from them, to learn from their skills and traditions and experiences and their life stories. That these kinds of direct interactions, we feel, are the best way for people to learn from one another. And then, of course, once they record the interviews, then we make them available for the public. And I just noticed there's a question from Michael about, does the Smithsonian have an archive?
The question, for user-submitted oral information, Michael says,
right.
I'm sure thousands of school students record their grandparents each year. Is there a central place to archive that data?
Good question.
Yeah, I don't think the Smithsonian does have such an archive. Joshua, do you know of something like that?
Well, we do have the National Anthropological Archive, but that is kind of a very particular beast. But you're right. As Rachel Zimmerman Brockman from Pasadena, California, said, the StoryCorps is one such, venue. We do, though, have a new program within the Smithsonian called Recovering Voices, which is about endangered languages and knowledge systems, which is working with communities to kind of help them set up various centers to kind of have their kind of oral history sites for their oral histories. But yeah, we do not have a kind of central repository, but that would be wonderful if we did.
Yeah, and someone, I think, was it Rachel, just mentioned StoryCorps, which is kind of a mobile recording device, and those recordings are archived at with our colleagues at the American Folklife Center of the Library of Congress. I see John has asked a question about techniques for recording. Is that something we'd like to get into now,
Yeah, I think
Alex,
we can do a little bit of that. I think we should just talk about our challenge here, because I think one of the things that we've said is that you don't have to be an expert, that anyone can do this, and you just start. So let's talk a little bit about our challenge. And I think one of the most important messages is that Shout has a worldwide reach. So the community that we're in right now can bring in stories from places that other members could never go. So it's a way of learning about each other and learning about our cultures and giving back to our own people, but also sharing with others. On the, I guess, why would students want to do oral histories? Can anyone think, I'd like to see some comments and some answers to that question, why you think you might want to do it, and then we will talk a little bit about how you can get resources and how you can learn how to do this and how to get started.
Well, a little earlier, Rachel had mentioned that everyone has a story to tell, and what a great way to capture it would be with an oral history. And while you think about the why, you can also think about what some of the advantages would be for recording an oral history with audio or video versus simply writing those histories down. That's something else we'd love you to think about and share. Barbara says that StoryCorps has a guide to recording on their website. We're going to also supplement that, a great resource with some ideas for you here today as well. So thank you, Barbara, for sharing that. Barbara also said some people are more comfortable speaking than writing. It goes for both the interviewee and the interviewer, that's for sure. And Kwani says that you might hear the stories that aren't traditionally told or shared. And you can see a bunch of responses coming in here.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, and also Marta mentioned that video can capture facial expressions and gestures, and that is essential. That is one of the things that really distinguishes oral histories, especially the video form, from written history, is that voice intonation and the gestures and the facial expressions that accompany what someone is saying are almost as important as the words themselves.
Right.
Definitely.
And I think that oral history also gives a chance to examine big themes like forest change or land use changes that are global issues, but also to look at it through a community lens. So you're seeing your part of this picture, but then you can connect with other pictures on a larger area.
Right. I mean, I think one of the things also, but, we don't, while we're advocating doing video, you don't need video, right? So you can do it with a tape recorder, you can do it with digital, with an old cassette, or you can do it just writing stuff down. I think the key, though, is to have some sort of recording technology, because that allows you to be more relaxed and not to focus on transcribing everything that the person says, and then actually listen to what they're saying. Because one of the things I think that oral history, I find that when I've done it, is we tend to go with our preconceptions of what we want to ask, and if we get locked in too much to that, we can often not listen to what people are saying and miss important cues about, what is unique about their life history and what they've experienced.
Right. It's also a chance to practice using technology if you do have technology, and to learn to work together in a group to practice your interviewing skills, get comfortable talking to people, and most of all, they're fun. Most of the kids that we've worked with have had a great time doing this and want to do more. So what does it take to get started? I think the first step, of course, is to pick a theme or pick a subject that's important to you. No historian starts out studying something that's not of interest to them. You have to find something that you're passionate about, and then find one or more interviewees or people who are knowledgeable about that subject, and then find out what you can about them. You don't have to know every single thing, because that's why you're interviewing them, but find out, more or less where they were born or what they might be able to add to your story, so that you can come in with a good list of questions.
And I see that Maria's just asking for strategies to help with people's resistance, and you're absolutely right. Some people will be resistant, and what I find works well is you just, you begin the interview with very easy questions, questions about who they are, where they are from, just to get them talking. And I think, always maintain good eye contact, and they'll soon forget about the camera, if there is a camera, or they'll forget about the recording device, which may be on the table, and they'll just engage in a frank conversation with you. But so you're absolutely right that some people will have some initial resistance, but I think that will ease once the conversation begins.
Right, and I would say that what happens, too, is to think about this kind of project as, well, there's the one-off kind of interview, but I think the most successful interviews that I've done is you build a rapport with someone over a period of time. Now, not all of us have the luxury to do that, but as Jim was saying, over time, in one interview, over a series of interviews, people get used to kind of the questions you're going to ask, expectations, but I think also one of the things is how to show respect to people, right? So you need to really honor them and kind of with the questions you're asking and in the way you ask them.
This is an interesting point, and I wanted to raise the comment that Jennifer just shared. She said that it is also important to remember that, especially if the recordings are archived somewhere, that these oral history documents could become part of a collective knowledge, and it helping other people with their research questions, not just what you had in mind when you were asking the question. And that's you're actually contributing to you're collecting primary source material that can be studied in many ways later.
And I think Marie's comments also about what strategies to help people's resistance being filmed. If people don't want to be filmed, they can just talk to them and write down the answers, and then maybe as you build a rapport, you can bring out the video camera. But let's we to help you get started, and we prepared a short video, and let's just play a clip from the video. It tells about how to get started.
That's great. We'll play that, and as we do, we're also going to show a little bit of after that. We'll show a little bit of the drawing that Dan is doing to capturing this great dialogue. So here's the short clip.
I'm interviewing different people who have been involved with the forest or have lived there. Probably the most important question is who to pick for your first interview. Where they live and how it's actually easier than you think. Where my friends live.
Think of people who have relationship to forests and maybe use forests in different ways, and that could be from anyone who, for example, is a hunter to someone who is in wildlife management, or let's say your grandfather or grandmother who, when they were younger, had an intimate relationship to the forest.
After choosing an interviewee, the key to a successful interview is to be completely prepared. Do a little research so that you know who you're talking to. It's important to make sure that you have enough time for the interview. Try to plan on at least 1 hour so that you're not rushed. Be sure to ask your interviewee to sign a permission form and be respectful of any privacy concerns he or she might have.
Is there anything else you think would be important for Alex and I to know before you go?
I think what is most important as they're talking is to listen to what they are saying.
And how we can manage it so we don't lose that valuable resource, our forests.
That's great. Do we want to see the drawing?
Yeah, let me bring up the drawing, and maybe while we check in with Dan and how he's capturing our dialogue today, we can take this interesting question from April about institutional review or human protection processes that you might need to do.
Yeah, I can address that briefly. I think the main thing is if you're working with an institution, you have to follow their rules. If you're working on your own, you have to, and this is important even if you're working with an institution, you have to respect the person and their desires. Many people want to share their story. They know that this is going to go out there, but you should never misrepresent what you're doing or to try to promise them something you can't deliver, or to say that you're not going to publish it and then publish it. You have to be very honest and upfront with the person and build a trust with them, and then that trust will come out in a better interview and will come out with everyone participating and being happy about the project.
Great point.
Definitely.
Incidentally, one quick note here that also came in from Michael, which is while you're interacting directly with the person you're interviewing, he's suggesting that you might be able to collect material like the photograph that Josh Bell showed us a little while ago from the 1920s, so that you have an object to accompany the story.
Right, and I would just add there, I think this is where actually bringing stuff, as I talked about, to an interview also can help put people at ease. So having historic photographs or objects, or, for example, walking through the forest that someone knows very well, can kind of take away some of perhaps what feels like artificial situation of being interviewed for some people, right? So it puts them in a familiar environment or gives them something to actually look at, to talk about. And, I've worked with communities where we've looked and I've collected baskets, which is really about people's relationship to sago palms and other things. But that's a very good point.
Great. And thanks to Dan, who's doing a nice job telling the story of our time together today.
That's great.
Okay.
I would just say just about the IRB, I think, as Alex mentioned, different institutions, government, etc., have various protocols, and so it's really essential to follow that. But it's also, again, important to be very clear with what you're doing with it. So, for example, I've had recorded stories where the people have told me explicitly, this is not to be published, this is not to be shared. And, I respect that. And so, again, it's about doing oral history work is about building up rapport. And if it is then deposited in an archive, you can also then ask that it, be closed to certain community members or to non-community members, etc.
Great.
That's great. Well, I think we've addressed this, why should you record on video, but I think the easiest answer to that is that it's available, that there's many kinds of video technology, pocket cameras, pocket camcorders, mobile devices, number of things that make it possible to record on video and does let you get those expressions, as one of our listeners contributed here. How do we run the interview? Jim, what do you think is the one most important thing when you're interviewing someone?
Well, I think it's what we were saying earlier about showing respect for the interviewee. And you sort well, obviously by selecting the interviewee, you are according them some respect. But just in sort of in the way you are dressed, the way you present yourself, the types of questions you ask, I think that is extremely important. And the second thing also that I always like to do is, listen to what the person is saying. And you may have come prepared with, a stack of questions that you are intending to answer, but don't let kind of your preparation get in the way of the conversation. Let the interviewee, your person you're talking to, make the conversation more organic. Again, listen to what they're saying and follow up on what they are saying, which may be different from the actual stack of questions you have prepared.
You all inspired me. This is Jonathan here, to find a cassette tape that I recorded when I was 9 years old with my great-grandmother, and last night I transferred it to digital media, so it's an MP3 file. And I listened to myself all those years ago recording this interview, and I realized that that is a skill I did not have then, and I'm still working on, which is how to listen. I kept saying, Jonathan, be quiet. I want to hear what great-grandma had to say. But so it's great advice, and I encourage those in the chat area to share your tips for good interviews. Things you might have learned in the chat box on the left.
Right. And we also encourage you to do interviews and send us the link to them. After you do your interview, you edit the video. Clearly, most clips online can be limited to about 10 minutes. It's very hard to post clips that are longer, but you can break things into segments, upload them, and send us the link. We also have a number of resources that are available. You can find them all at shoutlearning.org. Jim, do you want to talk about the guide from the Smithsonian Folklife and Oral History Guide?
Exactly, yes. That we at the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage have put together, I think, an excellent oral history interviewing guide that is available through our website. Do we have that link on the PowerPoint, or is that?
We actually have the link in the chat area. When you head to the Shout Learning site, to the oral history page, you'll see a link to the interviewing guide there as well.
Mm-hmm. And for those who are, since we're particularly interested in the forest, the Forest Service interviews are available as well, and another link on the shoutlearning.org. And finally, we have our 8-minute video that shows two students from Maryland, which is on the east coast of the USA, doing interviews for the first time and talking about their experience and sharing their best tips and suggestions, as well as Jim and Josh, who appeared in the video, and you can see them in person, not just hear their voices like we are today.
And I would just add, to echo everything that people have commented on, I mean, oral history is probably one of the most exciting things you can do. It gives you a glimpse into a world that you may have read about in a textbook, heard about, from your parents, grandparents, and it gives you direct access to it in a way, that nothing else does. And it opens up your world, your eyes to the world and to new experiences, which is really remarkable.
So the complete instructions for doing this challenge are there on our website, and when you send us the link, we will select videos and post them so that everyone in the Shout community can share. So this becomes a group effort, and we can all learn from each other's efforts. And we're also available there's an email link to answer questions, and if you have any suggestions or further follow-up.
This has been fantastic, and I mentioned a moment ago how all of you inspired me to tap into some local history to my own family, and this framework you've given us, the guide, the resources, and this challenge are something that I hope everybody who's with us today will seize on, and I think it'll be an amazing resource when we start to see what people submit here. There's some nice comments coming in, including one from Barbara, who works for the Forest Service for Forest Service Research, and they're talking about.
And Barbara was involved in our Smithsonian Folklife Festival in 2005, or at least for the traveling exhibition based on that Folklife Festival in 2005.
Oh, wonderful. Excellent. So she's talking about doing some follow-up with more people who are close to retirement. So that's an excellent connection. There's also some nice comments here from Marta and Rebecca who are talking about an oral histories booth at an upcoming exhibition that they have, and that this has been very helpful. I did want to just point out that you can, of course, follow the link in the chat to the Oral Histories Project, which is on the Shout Learning website. But there's many other ways you can keep this conversation going with your colleagues, even as you start up some conversations that you might record as part of this great project. Don't forget there is a teacher's guide on the website. You can see the link to the Partners in Learning Network.com site where you can find that, and it has some great challenges listed there in addition to this one to help your students, if you are a teacher, engage with each other and with local folks who they might make part of their oral history projects. Two, you can contribute both in the teacher community and in the global classroom, which is you can link to from the shoutlearning.org website, and you can also join the conversation with us on Twitter and Facebook. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a great new tour of the global classroom on the TIG site, and we've got the link there for you as well. So I'm going to go ahead and mention that in 8 minutes, Josh Bell is going to be back due to popular demand to present to us more in depth about his work in Papua New Guinea, talking about stories of the forest, and really in particular focusing on human impacts of deforestation. And he's witnessed this firsthand and also heard the stories firsthand, and we're going to go in more depth on that. So do stay tuned. We'll be back with you in about 8 minutes. I'm going to leave you all with this great graphic and this great visual story that Dan Porter has been capturing for all of us today to capture our story of today's session. So stay right where you are. We'll be back in about 7 minutes now with Josh and more. Thanks.